the Bucs are giving Baker Mayfield $100 million over 3 years. It's worth up to $115 million in total. What are your thoughts on the size of the contract for a guy like Baker Mayfield, who's kind of been a journeyman over the last few years and now kind of bet on himself and gets the big payday?
Yeah, I mean, like I get what you were talking about earlier with Kurt. I mean, I think what you're seeing with him is what the going rate for quarterbacks are. I think for him, he had a great year with Tampa, and that was big for him to get his redemption and get himself back on track. And I think he has good chemistry with the weapons there, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and so I think overall, I think this is a really good move for Baker. I mean, if you think about it in the grand scheme again, 115 million. That's not. It's not.
It's not a ton of money
insane.
for a QB over 3 years. Yeah.
It feels like it, but it's not. And so
And they're able to pay Mike handsomely as well.
Exactly. So you're able to get your starting quarterback locked in, and that's ultimately what they wanted: stability. They feel like Baker Mayfield gives them stability. We'll see if they start looking into, do we need to consider thinking about life after Baker Mayfield at some point? But I think overall, with the money that they're making with Baker, I think this was a solid deal for him, a solid deal for the team. And we don't know what other teams would have offered Baker Mayfield. I know that some people said that the Falcons didn't get Kirk Cousins. Baker might have been their backup plan. We
Right.
don't know what that would have turned into. We don't know how many other teams may have looked at him as a backup plan for them. So it's one of those things where Baker's always kind of had that moxie and that talent. I think it's just been about stability. It's been about the team, the weapons.
Correct.
Cleveland has been a mess of organization. You know how that goes. It's just one of those things where he kind of feels like maybe he's found a solid place and a solid stability in Tampa Bay, and now he's trying to use that as his ability to now continue to play well. Because at the end of the day, he didn't have an elite season, but he had a really good season.
Right.
And I think
Career
that's
year.
what I think they said, if you can give us this consistently, I don't see this being an overpay at all for a guy like you.
Yeah. Yeah. 100 or 115 million, whatever it is. It's really not a lot in the grand scheme of things. I'm happy for the fact that Baker Mayfield went from the Browns, lightning in a bottle year. Ironically, never made the Pro Bowl there. This last year that he was with the Bucs was his first year making the Pro Bowl. Then we see his hand in the dirt taking snaps for the Panthers. We see him go to the Rams, and then he signs a 1-year, $4 million deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And really bet on himself. I mean, he had Taylor Heineke and Jarrett Stidham were making more per year in terms of what they were making on their base salary than Baker Mayfield was last year. And Baker came in preseason, did a great job, 4,044 yards, 28 touchdowns, Pro Bowl for the first time, won the NFC South, won a playoff game too. So the fact that he bet on himself really, really paid off. And here's the crazy part, right? This is why I love this kind of, full circle moment for him. The Browns were so eager to move on from Baker Mayfield that they were willing to pay $10.5 million of his $15.5 million salary. So about 70% of the money they were willing to put that onto him, or excuse me, pay that for him while he was with the Carolina Panthers in 2022. And of course, we see the stupid move of them chasing Deshaun Watson, desperate move from a desperate franchise. So the money there didn't make sense. And even the money before, how they wanted to ship him out, it's just more blemishes on that ownership, with the Lord have mercy, the Cleveland Browns. But Baker's 29 years old. He's still could have plenty of prime years in front of him. We know that he's a former number 1 overall pick. I always thought it was pretty solid in college. I thought his judgment could have been better, as a lot of people thought as well. But him coming in 3 years, $100 million, they're definitely continuing to work on their core. And you look even further, he gets $30 million fully guaranteed in year 1, another $10 million guaranteed in 2025 at signing, and then he'll get another $10 million for injury that becomes fully vested next year. So just a little bit of a raise from the about $7 million that Baker Mayfield was making, really 6.85 that he was making there, in 2023. But I mean, like you said, this is the going rate for a quarterback now. And if Baker Mayfield can have a season this year like he did last year, continue that continuity with Mike Evans, possibly be in the contention for a weak NFC South, who knows if he could even win another playoff game, despite if it's the Eagles that are reeling in the back half of the season. Baker went out there and he did that. And when you go from being that number 1 overall pick, journeyman between the Rams and the Panthers, now you score your deal with the Bucs, and then you do this, hats off to him, man. I couldn't be happier for a guy in Baker, because I think his game is now going to be at another level, possibly. I believe it hit that next level with Dave Canales, but now again, with him being gone, as I said earlier in the show, that does worry me some. With Tampa having such a fairly strong roster, I mean, they've always had a strong roster, and that's why when they plugged out Jameis, plugged in Tom Brady, they were able to do what they did in the first year and winning the Super Bowl. Do you think this was
Mm.
the right move for Tampa? Would you maybe have liked to see them go after a free agent QB or maybe move up in the draft to take a guy?
Well, I think, when you always ask these questions, you got to think about, what do you have compared to what you can get?
Yep.
Not in really position to get a quarterback in the draft.
Yeah, I think they're picking 26th, 28th
Yes.
because
Yes,
they
yes,
want a
yes.
playoff game. They're in those high 20s.
So, and then you got to think about, okay, so if you can't do that, okay, who's available? Kirk Cousins, probably, right? Russell Wilson. All right. Are they really that much better than Baker? That's the first question you got to ask yourself.
Right.
And
Right.
then
Especially at this point with those two.
exactly. And then you got to think about what money they would want, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it's no point to replace Baker with Russell if you think they're the same player. It's like,
Right.
like, okay, he's cheaper, but he's the same player. Like what does that do for us if he's on a 1 year deal? And then what if he falls off? Like, it's one of those things too where I think Mike wanted to play with Baker. I think the receivers have some say in that because they obviously are like, I want to know who's throwing me the ball.
Hmm.
And obviously, once Mike Evans got locked up, Baker's interest to come back to Tampa Bay was greater.
Oh, yeah.
So it was one of those things where it's that situation where it's like, I mean, you really didn't have a better option.
Right.
And
Compared
so
to
it
the
was
money and what
better
those
off
other free
sticking
agent
with what
quarterbacks are
you
showing.
know, continue to build, and see where it takes you. Obviously, now losing Canales could be big. We'll see how that affects the offense. But it was one of those situations where it's like you really couldn't go really nowhere else with it. Because
Right.
there's no point to move off of someone if you know you're not getting a clear upgrade from Baker Mayfield.
Yeah. Yeah. Very fair point there. I feel like I would have liked to see, I wouldn't say a stacked roster, but it's one of the better rounded ones in the NFL. The offense is respectable with the players they present, especially in the receiving core. The offensive line production. We look at the defense as well. That's always there. Todd Bowles being that defensive minded head coach, we understand that. Unlike any team, but especially with Tampa, or like any team, especially with Tampa, like when Tampa's healthy on the defensive side of the ball, they can hang with some of the best offenses in the league. They can go out there and win you games defensively. And now Baker on the flip side, being that solid distributor of the football, you can do nothing but appreciate it and just be happy for the fact that this guy found himself to another deal. We didn't know if Baker was going to be anything. Like, we're over here calling him a bust possibly after the first couple years. And while his first, his rookie year was fantastic, you see as things play on, and he's at the mercy of Freddie Kitchens, and then Kevin Stefanski comes in, wins coach of the year. They almost go to the AFC Championship. Chad Henne has to come in for the Chiefs and make a throw. The Browns are blowing out the Steelers that year though in the playoffs, and now Kevin Stefanski is winning another coach of the year. But then he takes his talents over to the Bucks and does what he's able to do, and it's just it's remarkable to know that he kept his composure after kind of being a journeyman over those last 2 or 3 seasons. I mean, it felt like he was with 3 teams within a span of a season and a half, a season, maybe 2 seasons, because he was with the Browns over to the Panthers. The Panthers trade him in the middle of the year to the Rams. And then he, takes that a little bit better than a vet minimum, but that big time prove it deal going over to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It would have been nice again, to see Tampa Bay maybe compete for a top quarterback in the draft. I think a Michael Penix could have been a nice suitor. Maybe they could sit there at, I believe it's 26 or 28, those high 20s in the first round pick, in the first round of the draft, and possibly snag him. Maybe I'm a little delusional, but whenever I see teams that have got some cap space money to spend and they've managed it well and they're able to hand out deals like this, I'm like, well, dang, they probably had some draft capital in there. I mean, you can always, I know it sounds funny, but like you can trade part of your yearly cash. We've seen it done on a rare occasion, and I think you have to work it out a certain way. But it would have been nice to see them chase, a quarterback that's coming in for this draft. But a lot like you said, when you look at all the other quarterbacks that were in free agency, they were either snagged or not as desirable compared to Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield's last year. And when you look at the money they would have commanded, I mean, the Steelers got a steal. After this year, the Broncos are taking 85 million. Who knows what it's going to kick in like for the Pittsburgh Steelers? That's why it's a 1 year deal. They don't want to have to be
Mm.
financially committed. And Kirk Cousins just got the bag backed up to him. So they definitely take a nice pay cut here as Baker Mayfield is able to secure this contract and not necessarily break him out.